You want to know what a weed smoker looks like? You're staring at one. You know, like, I'm a weed smoker. I'm not like crazy or, you know, I'm not stabbing you right now.
Most of the violent crime that's committed, or most of the crime period that's committed having to do with drugs, is people who are on drugs committing violent crimes. If you make it legal, if you make it cheaper, you make it more available, you're going to have more violence, more addiction,
Tom, that is
more
not
crime.
true. Stop lying to us.
Oh, now come on.
Stop lying to us. That is not true. You know, don't tell me that. I've smoked pot, Tom.
But
I've admitted it. I've done it. I've done all of the big three. I've done tobacco, I've done alcohol, and I've done marijuana, Tom. Guess what? Marijuana's the least of the three, pal.
A lot of our understanding is driven by what's in the paper and on the television and the radio these days, and we get extremes, and the black and white thinking is reinforced, I think, by that.
If only there was something to compare it to, something that was prohibited at one time but is now regulated, so we could see what the difference might be. What could that be? What could that be?
Under prohibition of alcohol, everything got worse. Everything.
Alcohol prohibition really birthed and gave rise to massive organized criminal groups within the United States. It led to a general disregard for the law and a general disregard for police activity because it was a law that most people didn't obey.
Would you have supported the prohibition of alcohol 75 years ago?
Well, I'm glad you brought up the alcohol example. I mean, as a governor, you must have known firsthand the cost of alcohol. I hear this argument a lot of times, like alcohol.
That isn't what I asked you, Tom. I asked you a specific question. Don't give me spin. I said, would you have supported the prohibition of alcohol 75 years ago?
I don't think I would have.
Why?
Because alcohol, for better or worse, and a lot of times for worse, it's a close call, is a long entrenched and ingrained part of our culture and our society. I mean, you go back thousands of years, the first writing is about alcohol, the Bible, everything else. It's really hard to reach in
Tom, wait
and
a minute.
pull this out of society.
Let me inject something then. Then if you believe that God also made the marijuana plant,
about society. I'm talking about our culture and our society.
You just said the Bible.
Cannabis and issues related to cannabis. I'd like to introduce to you Brian Seaman. He's with the Alberta Civil Liberties Research Centre at the University of Calgary. He's going to be speaking about some legal matters. Over here we have Lindsay from the Young Liberals. She's a lawyer right now at the University of Calgary. Law student. Sorry. Law student. And she's actually the Liberal that drafted the policy that we are now using as legalization. Yeah, so this is the girl that works on policy for both Alberta and BC. And for someone who's a law student, she's come so far already. I just can't imagine. You could be looking at the next Prime Minister. I'm not kidding. Right here, for everybody who doesn't know, this is Keith. Keith has been working for years here in Calgary with the local 420 group. And because he is such an active member of the community, he knows this subject better than almost anybody. All the members confide with him on issues that are happening. So we have so much expertise here on this issue. So we'll start with Brian, Lindsay, and then we'll have Keith finish off. And then we'll open up to the public some of the issues you might have, concerns. We have policy chair right here so that we can move forward with policy ideas if there's something you would like to see. I'm Michelle Robinson with the Calgary East Federal Liberals, and I've been updating on our events page. So everything that you're seeing will be taped, and there will be a link put up on that event page. So if you see something you like or don't like, please feel free to let me know if you don't like it, and share the links that you do like. So
if you don't want to be taped, you can ask the questions afterwards to one of us personally. Okay? Cool.
Excellent.
Or write your question down.
Or write it down.
Pass it to Michelle.
Excellent. All right. So I will get into the back and make some papers so that we can facilitate that. There's tables right towards the back there, and they have all sorts of information. They have information for the 420 group, and I'm a member of 12 CSI, and there's some community bulletin boards and initiatives happening that I put some information there as well. If you'd like to go for a free dinner, things like that, just pick up the brochure. So with that, I'm going to introduce Brian Seaman from the Alberta Civil Liberties, and I'll let him take us off here.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and thank you very much, Michelle, for organizing this event tonight and bringing us all together to discuss this very important issue. I am a civil liberties and human rights research lawyer. I work for the Alberta Civil Liberties Research Centre, and I want to make it clear that I am here on my own behalf here tonight. My views do not necessarily reflect the views of my colleagues and indeed the centre itself. Although I assure you, being civil libertarians, there's a lot of empathy there for people who have been deemed to be criminals by the federal government because they use marijuana for medical purposes. I'm going to be restricting most of my comments tonight to the medical marijuana regulations, and I'll be critiquing them from a civil liberties perspective, and then I'll be wrapping things up by explaining why I am in favor of absolute legalization and not decriminalization. I live in Kensington, Sunnyside, and there are two colloquially known head shops on 10th Street Northwest, and they contain paraphernalia, and everybody knows what that paraphernalia is used for. And I look at these shops as sort of symbols of the hypocrisy of the society we live in. It's not technically illegal to smoke a marijuana joint. That's technically correct. It's not technically illegal, but it is illegal to buy, sell, and grow unless you qualify for medical exemption.
Brian, I don't mean to interrupt you, but there's a fan right here that's really loud. So could you speak up just a bit?
Oh, sure. How's this? How's this?
That's better.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
I can project the theatrical voice. The medical exemptions under Health Canada, it's actually a fairly recent thing. The medical exemptions came into effect following a decision of the Supreme Court of Canada back in 2000 in the case of the Crown versus Terence Parker. Terence Parker was a man who suffered from epilepsy, and he found that smoking marijuana was the most effective way to control his very severe epileptic seizures. There was no exemption for medical marijuana up until this case, and he grew his own product, and the police got wind of it somehow and investigated, and he was charged with illegally growing marijuana. And the Supreme Court of Canada, his case did make its way to the Supreme Court of Canada, and the argument at the Supreme Court of Canada was that his Section 7, his Charter Section 7 rights to life, liberty, and security of the person were imperiled by prohibition against marijuana. He argued successfully, his lawyers argued successfully that he needed marijuana to control his seizures, and that this prohibition constituted an unjustifiable infringement not only on his personal liberty but also indeed on his right to access a substance to ensure him a better life. Now the court did find then, they struck down the existing marijuana prohibition. They found it unconstitutional because it said that there was not an exemption for medical reasons. So this is how the medical marijuana exemptions came into effect, because the government of the day then said, okay, well fine, we'll bring in these exemptions for medical reasons. And they brought in what's called the medical marijuana access regulations. Many people in the room here will know that there are two categories under which you can get a certificate. You have either severe pain or weight loss because of cancer or AIDS, nausea from cancer, severe pain from arthritis, and a list of other health conditions. Then there's category 2, which is any debilitating symptoms or conditions that do not fall under category 1. So that means that it's easy to get a certificate, right? No, hardly. Because as many people in the room know, you have to apply for such an exemption. You need to fill out a declaration. I've read the declaration. It's voluminous, it's confusing, it's difficult to fill out. It makes an income tax, long-form income tax form look easy in comparison. You also need to get a doctor to sign off on a certificate. The certificate, the doctor has to certify that you do indeed qualify for an exemption. And That should not be a problem, right? Getting a doctor to sign off on a certificate. Well, as many people in this room will know, it is indeed not only difficult, it's virtually impossible to get a certificate, to get a doctor to sign off on such a certificate. There was a case that came before the Ontario Superior Court back in 2011. I wrote a blog about it. The man's name was Matthew Murnau. He suffers from various medical conditions, including fibromyalgia and various other neurological conditions. And he had tried numerous different medications, and the only substance that controlled his symptoms was marijuana. So he was growing his own marijuana, and he was charged with illegally growing marijuana. Case made its way to the Ontario Superior Court, and the Ontario Superior Court Justice struck down Canada's marijuana medical regulations as being unconstitutional, because what he found, based on the evidence that Mr. Murnau's lawyer led, was that effectively the physicians of this country are colluding in denying to hundreds of thousands, perhaps over 1 million Canadians, the right to access state-sanctioned and approved marijuana. The lawyer for Mr. Murnau argued successfully before the judge that effectively the doctors in this country were colluding and denying a right to marijuana for persons who needed it to control their symptoms. And the court found, therefore, that Mr. Murnau's Section 7 right to security of the person, to a substance that helps to control his symptoms, was violated. The Crown, on the other hand, they had argued unsuccessfully at this level. The Crown had argued that the doctors were not, could not be considered to be actors or agents of the state, because the state doesn't have any role in telling the doctors, well, you know, you have to approve the certificate or you have to not approve the certificate. That is a totally bogus argument. We do have a public health care system in this country. Doctors' salaries are paid by you, by me, by all of us, the taxpayers. They are indeed agents of the state. They are employees of the state. Therefore, this argument did not fly with the judge at the Ontario Superior Court level. Unfortunately, the matter was appealed, and the Ontario Court of Appeal, unfortunately, 2 years later, actually just this year, earlier this year, reversed the findings of the Ontario Superior Court and reinstated the medical marijuana regulations, said that they were in fact constitutional, and sent the matter back to trial. So it is still very much a real issue for Mr. Murnau. His liberties at stake, his Section 7 interests are at stake, and indeed the interests and the personal security of hundreds of thousands of Canadians, perhaps over 1 million Canadians who need marijuana to help control their symptoms. Their liberty is at stake. The medical marijuana regulations themselves, I have very grave concerns as a civil libertarian, as somebody who has had relatives who have had debilitating conditions, and indeed personally know people who smoke marijuana on a regular basis to control muscular sclerosis. I know of an elderly woman in her late 70s who needs to smoke marijuana on a regular basis to help her deal with the nausea she experiences with chemotherapy. I think it is fundamentally, blatantly, egregiously wrong to live in a country where we have over 1 million people who are branded criminals for smoking a product that they need to control their symptoms or to control their conditions. And I think that as a civil libertarian as well, I have grave concern over the fact that when people opt into these medical marijuana regulations, their information, their personal information is on record. The government knows who is smoking marijuana. They also know who is selling the marijuana to these people, because in order to get the marijuana legally, the people have to apply for and get get a certificate from, or rather get a licensed grower to grow it for them. And that's even if they can get the certificate at all, because as many people in the room know, it's virtually impossible to get a certificate legally in this country. So over 1 million Canadians who require this substance to help control their symptoms are therefore obliged to go to an alternative means to get their product. And I can personally vouch for the fact that I know anecdotally and personally know people who sell the product, and they make getting this product to people who are sick, who are dying, who are suffering their priority. Sorry, there's just a note here. Could you talk about the legal action being launched by Sir John Conroy? I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that, so I can't.
We'll just
I
pass it
could
on to
speak
the
to
other
that
panel.
later
Okay.
if you want. Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah. So I'm opposed to medical marijuana regulations, not because I'm opposed to people having access to a substance they need to control their symptoms. I'm opposed to it for 2 reasons. First of all, because I think there are civil liberties implications with government having that kind of information on its citizens. And secondly, I'm in favor of legalization. I think that it's a person's choice, it's an adult's choice, what you want to do with your body. Cigarette smoking has been proven to be egregious for the health, and yet that's a legal substance. Alcohol is the gateway drug. Alcohol is a gateway drug to a lot of other drugs, and alcohol is responsible for, billions and billions of dollars in lost productivity, and yet that's a legal substance.
Is advertising guilty of that?
Yeah, right. I don't know how many people are familiar with the history of prohibition on marijuana, but and perhaps Keith can talk about this some more when he talks. But it was not illegal to smoke marijuana, up until the 1920s, both in this country and in the United States. But for some reason, that time frame, the racism was much more blatant then, and you had an increase in immigration, and the powers that be in the United States and Canada looked at this product, and it was linked with Black Americans, with Mexicans, and God forbid, jazz musicians. I mean, there's this whole notion of reefer madness, right? I mean, one hit from that joint will turn you into a homicidal maniac, a rapist, or God forbid, somebody would hang out with Negroes, Mexicans, and jazz musicians. And the racism that the cause was steeped in, it was very blatant then. And we can look at a movie like Reefer Madness. I don't know how many people have seen Reefer Madness. Even by the standards of 1930s movie making, it was a badly made movie, right? It's no Citizen Kane, that is for sure. We watch it now for its camp value and we laugh at it.
Yes.
But we have, in this day and age, a far more sophisticated way of categorizing issues. And we can laugh at the rhetoric and the overblown rhetoric and the racist rhetoric of the 1920s and the 1930s, but we still have it today. It's just a lot more sophisticated, right? Now it's coached in, the war on drugs and, the evils of marijuana. We have to protect our children. The rhetoric is still there. It's just become much more sophisticated. And I don't want to see my niece continue to live in a country where we are making criminals of millions and millions of Canadians, over 1 million Canadians who need this product for controlling symptoms and for helping to control conditions like muscular sclerosis. And I also don't want to see government telling me and telling other people what we can and cannot do. I personally know of many people who, after a busy week, pour a glass of wine and spark up. I have been an occasional user since I was 19 years old. What I do in the weekends in the privacy of my own home is my own business. I can think of a lot of practical economic reasons why marijuana should be legalized. We tax it, we regulate it like we do with alcohol. Just like alcohol has different concentrations of alcohol in the liquid, and you pay more for 40% proof, we could do the same thing with THC products. And we could regulate it and keep it out of the hands of children. I'm opposed to decriminalization because decriminalization for me, I mean, there are people who say that decriminalization could include just, could represent just allowing people to smoke a small amount or have a small amount in their possession and then fine them. Well, that is not legalization. I'm opposed to that. I do not want the state involved at all in telling me what I can do with my body. The only reason why I would want to see state involvement would be to monitor the production of the substance, so I know what I'm smoking, so I know that I'm not smoking something that's laced with PCP or has illegal pesticides in it and God knows what else in it. It should be regulated and taxed, and the taxes should then go into the public trust, the public funds, to help pay for our roads, our schools, and our healthcare system, just like we do with alcohol. I think I will end on that note. Oh, I did want to say just one final thing, and that is that because of how I've seen this issue played out in the courts, where with the Ontario Court of Appeal decision in the Murnau decision this year, which effectively restored these regulations and therefore means that prohibition is going to continue. I'm going to tell you flat out, and especially you, Keith, and any other 420 activist here, if you're contemplating launching another court challenge or a constitutional challenge, I would urge you to save your money and to spend it lobbying, perhaps make donations to candidates who are in favor of legalization. Having said that, there's no shortage of lawyers that would be quite happy to take your $250,000 and take this all the way to the Supreme Court. But it's clear to me that the legal process, the judicial process, you've hit a dead wall there. And so I think that now it is a political issue, and it is in the political arena that this must be resolved, and it must be resolved by a government finally doing the adult thing and legalizing this thing and taking us from the early 20th century of Ku Klux Klan men lynching black people into the 21st century, where we've moved beyond, where many of us have moved beyond racism, and many of us who believe in liberty are quite happy with a regime where we are allowed to do what we want with our bodies, so long as we're not harming other people. It is our right to do what we want with our bodies. And I think I'll end on that note.
But our next speaker is going to be Lindsay from the Young Liberals. She was the one who drafted the policy for the Liberals. So we'll let her talk a little bit about that, and then we'll move forward.
Okay. Hi,
Thanks,
I'm Lindsay. Can everyone hear me all right? Fantastic. So I'm going to start by actually giving a history of narcotics policies in Canada, and just kind of explaining a little bit more what Brian has said. And then I will talk a little bit about the history of the Liberal Party of Canada in their quest to legalize marijuana. So Brian is correct. A lot of our narcotics policies started out as very racist policies. The first narcotics policy in Canada came in 1907, which was, and in 1908, which is a direct reaction to the riots in Vancouver over Chinese immigrants and their perceived opiate use. Most of the immigrants who came to Vancouver from China were here to work on the railroad. They were young, male, and without their families. And many of them continued to be without their families because of the head tax. And took a lot of them to smoking a lot of opiates, just as a recreational thing. And so in 1908, the Opium Act was passed. And it was, revision was passed in 1911. And then finally in 1923, marijuana, cocaine, and heroin were added into a consolidated act which passed in 1929. Interestingly, the 1923 act coincided with the end of the head tax. So that is where a large portion of our narcotics policies have come from. It was a direct reaction to the riots in Vancouver over the immigration of Chinese workers. And in terms of the Liberal Party, I mean, legalization and change on policy in marijuana has been going on for a long time, and I'm not going to take credit for starting it by any means. It's been happening in our party for 40 years. And most recently, yes, in 2012, we passed at the National Convention a policy to legalize, regulate, and tax marijuana. That was started by two groups, the Young Liberals of Canada and the Liberal Party of Canada in British Columbia, of which I was a part at the time, at our provincial convention in 2011. And so that policy outlines in about a page how we feel about marijuana. And I'm not talking about medical marijuana, I'm talking about marijuana use at large. Our policy generally, I know that a lot of you are here to talk about medical marijuana, but our policy does concentrate on marijuana at large. And our policy does say that we would like to regulate, legalize, and tax. And that was taken forward from the 20th Convention, and there is now a policy white paper that you can read online. It's a little bit more in depth. It's about 35 pages long, sorry. And it really outlines kind of, yes, we say let's legalize, but what does that really mean for our country? What does that look like? How does that affect our international standing? I mean, we're signatories. Canada is a signatory to 3 conventions, United Nations conventions on narcotics policy. So, and that's generally where our schedules come from in the CDSA. If you ever look at narcotics policies in different countries, they look remarkably similar to ours because everyone pretty much copied the schedules. And so we've moved forward. We have our white paper now, which really outlines, a lot of questions that people have. If it's legal, who gets to have it? What are the rules? What does that mean for our country? Can you export it? And so those are all questions, and we can talk if you have specific questions after. But generally, how our party feels is that marijuana is a substance that can be used by legal adults, not children. It can be obtained in the same way that you obtain alcohol, and it can be consumed in a manner that's safe. And what that means is basically very similar to how alcohol is consumed. Do not drive, and there are some different rules maybe about use around children because it is mostly smoked. I mean, obviously, if you're using a vaporizer, or if you're smoking a lit joint, there are going to be issues with consumption around minors because they'll also be consuming it at that same time in a way that they don't consume alcohol when you drink alcohol. But other than that, I mean, our policy follows very much what Brian says and what John Stuart Mill said a couple hundred years ago. Unless you're harming someone else, the state cannot tell you what to do with your body. So yeah, and I mean, moving forward, we have formed a national working group to continue on to make sure that this policy isn't just something that we've said in nice words that we're going to do it, but that it's still moving forward. And obviously, it's working out pretty well because Justin Trudeau is on board now. So yeah.
Awesome.
So I will let Keith go from there.
Thank you, Michelle. My pleasure to be here. I just want to start here with some science, and that's what we're based on. Our community, Calgary 420, Alberta 420, is we speak about science. We speak about responsible adult consumption. We're not out in the street doing protests, smoking joints. We're here, we're high, get used to it. That might have worked for the gays, but it doesn't work for us. 40 years of that nonsense has gotten us nowhere but mandatory minimums in Canada. So we speak about science, we speak about evidence, and that's what I'm here to speak to you about. Now, we've got studies I can list off from 1894. There's a bunch of documents back there and whatnot that we're giving away free. Take multiple copies. It's all about the science, the facts. It's not my opinion. This is all fact, this is all science. To get started on that science, the most recent one was from the Beckley Foundation, just released September 15, 2013. Entitled A Regulated Cannabis Market in England and Wales and a Cost-Benefit Analysis. This is carried out by the Institute for Social Economic Research at the University of Essex in the UK. So of course this is a quality study that we can listen to. I'd like to just give you one of their quotes that they stated on their press release. If we are to protect the young, surely the governments can do a better job of it than the drug cartels. They actually say cartels, but I know drug cartels, and it is, you know, like drug dealers are not going to ask for ID. They're not going to worry about quality like Brian spoke of, and regulation like Lindsay spoke of, where you do have to have quality regulations. You're not going to be getting sprayed pot with pesticides or methamphetamine or whatever else is out there this day and age. Now, May 2013, we also have the Canadian Drug Policy Coalition. They're out in Vancouver here with involved with the Fraser Institute, and they also found that we need to legalize drugs, not just decriminalize. It's a health issue, it's not a criminal issue. And that's their premise on this. That's what they are looking towards. And then you get to the 2011, the Health Officers Council of British Columbia, Public Health Perspectives, Regulating Psychoactive Substance, and what we can do about alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. Again, regulation. The Global Commission on Drug Policy in 2011, a 22-person panel of retired policymakers, prime ministers, and higher-ups in the governments, stated, this is the quote from them, the global war on drugs has failed with devastating consequences for individuals and societies around the world. 2009, The Economist, Latin American Commission on Drugs and Democracy, 2009 again. One of the bigger ones, over 600 pages, probably one of the most extensive. In 2002, now just over 11 years old as of September 4th, the Senate Special Committee on Illegal Drugs, Cannabis, Our Position on a Canadian Policy. Thank you, I could choose that. Now I'm going to read some quotes here, direct quotes from this 600+ page report. The continued prohibition of cannabis jeopardizes the health and well-being of Canadians much more than the substance itself. Also, it is time to recognize what is patently obvious. Our policies have been effective because they're poor policies. 1998, The Economist, ending the war on drugs, calling for the end of prohibition. You know, and again, I've got sheets over there that can go back listing these studies and quotes from these studies to 1894, calling for the repeal of prohibition. It doesn't work, don't do it. And then as Lindsay said, we started into it in 1907, 1908 with the Opium Act. As to the reference to the racism, you know, if we look back, and I'm going to talk about a person that's very famous. There's a statue of her, as a matter of fact, down at Olympic Plaza. She's part of the famous five that got the vote for the women. Her name is Emily Murphy. Now, she was the first magistrate in Canada, and the British Empire for that matter, in 1916. So she dealt with a lot of the Chinese, and that they were disproportionately going to court, in front of her court, and she was dealing with a lot of this. So I can understand her reasoning at the time for the book she wrote, The Black Candle. That was written in, she had it released in 1922 under the pen name of Janie Canuck. Yeah, it was Janie Canuck. So I'm just going to read you a quote from this book. When coming from under the influence of cannabis, marijuana, pardon me, this was her word, the victims present the most horrible condition imaginable. They are dispossessed of their natural, normal willpower, and their mentality is that of idiots. If this drug is indulged to any great extent, it ends in the untimely death of its addict. She also goes on later in the book and describes Chinese people as, this is quoted by her, black-haired beasts in our human jungle. Now that's equaled 90 years of reefer madness. It really has, folks. She also wrote a number of articles in Maclean's magazines through the 20s. We got to understand the racism, it's already been mentioned twice here, was rampant. It was a very big thing. You know, we know it's still in our communities today, in fact. Another issue I want to touch on quickly with you folks is the DARE program. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of it since the 70s and beyond. I know I have. Now, the U.S. National Academy on Sciences, the U.S. Surgeon General, the U.S. General Accounting Office have all condemned the DARE program as a failure since 1998, and the U.S. Department of Education has prohibited schools using federal funds on DARE. Canadian Centre on Substance Abuse issued a report in 2007 called Youth in Focus, which has recommended that the DARE program was not effective and it should be not effective being taught by police officers, and teachers should be teaching that. Now I'm going to go back to the 2002 Senate Committee's quote on DARE. The 2002 Canadian Senate Special Committee on Illegal Drugs concluded, prevention strategies in schools should not be led by police services or delivered by police officers. They also said the RCMP should reconsider its choice of the DARE program that many evaluation studies have shown to be ineffective. What we need to do is replace the DARE program with science, with evidence, and with facts. We're all responsible adults here. We need to act as such. Like it or not, it doesn't matter. Every day we do things we don't like. We have to go to work and do a job we don't like because we're responsible adults. We want what's best for our families and ourselves. So now we got to teach them with science and evidence, even if we don't like it or agree with it. Now, there's a few more things I'd like to touch on about myths, but I see a lot of familiar faces here. I know a lot of you already know. In fact, I know a lot of non-consumers. We've done many trade shows at the Big Fort, Strathmore, Health Expos. We've had our cannabis displays out, legal medical cannabis displays, always legal, always done properly. That's the way we do things, and it's really helped educate city officials. We've worked with the Calgary Police Service for many years. We've got a good relationship with them. None of our members have ever been arrested doing any of our activities, you know, public, private, etc. We don't get bothered because they know what we're about. They've seen that we've come to them. We don't want to fight with you, but if you want to fight, we'll give it to you. We want to teach our children the truth about drugs, not to tell them to consume drugs, but to tell them the truth, so that when we're lying to them, they're not going to believe when we tell them, you know, about the drugs, about the real problems with drugs. That happened to me when I was very young. I believed in all the reefer madness nonsense, and then we went out camping when I was 11 years old. Twice in the same year, there was these stereotypical hippies in the VW bus, and they were all happy and having a great time, and they helped my dad with some firewood and all that. And I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. And later that night, there was that smell, right? And I didn't know it was marijuana the first time, and I didn't think nothing of it, right? Well, the second time it happened, we were at a different campsite later in that year, and it was people like my mom and dad. You know, they had a few beers, they were cooking on the barbecue, they had kids running around. They were normal, regular people, not your stereotypical hippies. And there was that smell again. And I asked my dad about that. Why are they not running off to the village to rape, murder, and pillage and jump off of high buildings trying to fly? And my dad just shook his head and said, son, I don't know. I don't know what to say. And you could see, to me, I could see that my dad wanted to talk to me about it, but reefer madness, you know, I'm 54 years old. When I was 11, that reefer madness was very, very strong, and a lot of people still believed in that reefer madness video, Brian. It was, you know. But anyway, I'll leave that at that. I was going to talk to you about some of the myths in the Gateway, like Alison, our premier here, Alison Redford, a few weeks ago spoke on about the Liberal leader Justin Trudeau, saying that he's consumed cannabis and he wants legalization. She promptly stood up and said it's a gateway drug. And this is completely nonsense. This has been, you know, shot down since 1933 in the Rand Corporation when there was a study done on in the states that had decriminalized cannabis versus the states that had not decriminalized cannabis, and the actual facts showed them, based on that the states that decriminalized hard drug abuse as measured by emergency room episodes were lower in the states that cannabis was available. I can tell you, I've seen it hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. People have gotten off alcohol, they've gotten off meth, they've quit cigarettes because they're consuming cannabis. It relieves stress. So when Brian mentioned people going home after work and having a joint, is that recreational? I think it's more like medicinal. You're relieving stress. We know stress kills, so it is a medicinal product even at that time. Even if you consider the odd time recreational. Sure, we're out having a good time in the evening and that, and I'm going to smoke a little bit of sativa that will, you know, make my mood uplifted, will make me want to dance, make me go out and enjoy being with other people, where your other indica is pretty much the opposite. It's what your commercial guys are selling, your criminal organizations are selling. They can grow that in 8 weeks or less, and the sativas are going to take about 16 weeks, 12 to 16 weeks. So they're going to go for that smaller plant that's going to produce more quicker and get it out there. And the indicas do give you a very relaxed feeling, a very medicated feeling. It increases the alpha waves in your brain, which is also contributes to creativity and in human beings as well. So there is a lot of benefits, not just medicinal. You get the one myth there where they're talking about the strength of cannabis is much more than it was in my day, but that's not true. It was actually, you could get the strongest form of cannabis you could get was from a pharmaceutical company in the 1920s and the 1930s. It was actually still in the, cannabis was still in the pharmacopoeia, US pharmacopoeia, till the 1940s. So they've known there's medicinal values. There always has been medicinal values. And we need to get more research on that. We do have a lot of research being done. There's people here in Canada, the Canadian Consortium on the Investigation of Cannabinoids. They've been at it since 2000. They're a nonprofit, registered in 2000. And they're researchers from basic and clinical science nationwide that are part of this. The purpose of the Canadian Consortium for the Investigation of Cannabinoids is to advance our understanding of the role of health and disease through research. Now, unfortunately, the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta always have recommended against physicians participating in the Health Canada MAR, stating there's no science and evidence. But that's nonsense. They know about the Canadian Consortium. They know there is evidence out there. And even worse, 18 months ago approximately, they changed their wording from recommending against to strongly recommending against. So they've just taken us even farther backwards. Also the mandatory minimums that Brian had mentioned, we're moving backwards. The US has done it for 30 years. They've got 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's prison population, and they're private prisons. It's easy, cheap to house cannabis consumers. We don't break the law. We go to work, we do our job, we raise our families, we provide, we're positive contributors to our society and our communities. Excuse me. So that's, I'm gonna leave it at that, folks, and we gotta stop going backwards and we gotta come forward. And you have questions, you know, I'm more than willing to answer them, Brian and Lindsay as well. So thank you for taking time for this, folks, all of you.
So I'm going to open it up now for comments. Our panelists are here to answer any questions you wish to ask publicly. If you have comments, just regular statements that you have, now would be a good time to say it. So the question is, will it be allowed to be grown in your home as well as being legalized? So I'll let Lindsay start.
So, I mean, yes, you will probably still need a license. And the reason for that is, of course, but like, and I understand that, but I mean, it does come down to a bit of a safety issue, just making sure that you are taking proper precautions, making sure that the wiring is proper, that the plumbing is proper, that we aren't, you know, entering into situations where people aren't getting licensed electricians to put in, if they are putting a setup in. I personally do know someone who died in a fire because they had wired their basement wrong for a grow-off. And so I don't think that should ever happen, ever again. So I mean, in terms of licensing for personal use, The thought, of course, is to make sure that situation doesn't happen. That being said, licensing for personal use will be just that, personal use. There will be no sale, no exchange. If that is a business license, and that can be applied for, but there will be separate kinds of licensing because, I mean, a business is a business, and if you're selling, that's a business, end of story. So.
What about one medical person to another? I grab a little bit of what I've grown and I trade it with a friend that he's grown.
Unless, again, like I said, medical is going to still be separate. And I understand that, but at the same time, it's the cost we're saving in so many other areas. We already have inspectors for medical marijuana licensing. If it's medical to medical, I mean, if you have someone who is a licensed grower for however many prescriptions, that's just going to be the same way as it is now.
My grower had my license for 7 years ago, once
Could I just mention something real quickly, Lindsay? For me, our best, easiest and best way to do this, cannabis is less harmful than even caffeine. You know, we know that, the science is there, the facts is there. Is the best way to go with this, I think, and even Normal Canada, I'm actually a representative for Normal Canada for the Prairies as well, which is a national organization for the reform of marijuana laws. We're calling for like a beer and wine model. Currently, I can produce beer and wine in my own home, and I can share with all my friends as they come over, or we go over there, hey, check out my wine, hey, check out my wine. I'm not selling it, so we're okay with that. We do want regulation. We do want microbreweries, micro growers to compete with the big corporate boys like they do now. Microbreweries and micro wineries are making a living. They are getting a market share against corporations, and that's what our community, Normal Canada, has been registered as non-profit since '78. They started in the US in the early '70s, but '78 in Canada, registered non-profit. So yeah, we're working on a policy like that, and we'd really like to get the Liberals to look at it.
Yeah. So just so you understand, what I'm expressing is what the Liberal Party has expressed as a policy, right?
Yeah.
So far.
So far.
So we're
exactly.
adding on. Can't really argue.
The policy includes that the problem isn't
Sorry,
pertaining to
can you speak up?
If the government's stating that the problem is because of the permits required for electrical and whatnot, why would they think they needed it would be to be done on a mass scale? If everyone's doing it themselves, then you wouldn't need 50 lights and whatnot. What's the difference of when you do anything in your home? There's a lot of people that don't even know how to set up VCRs and whatnot and have tangled wire. Why do they always think that they need a permit for this and a permit for that?
Okay, so I'm gonna express two things. First, we're not talking about the government. We're talking about the Liberal Party of Canada. We don't currently form government. Secondly, it's if you are setting those things up, right? There needs to be a licensing system to make sure that when those things are set up, that they are done properly. If if the license, I don't know how the license is going to work, right? It's going to be up to the bureaucracy to figure out. Because I am not a bureaucrat, and I don't know how that they're going to set that up. But what that means then is if you're not setting things up, maybe your license has a check mark. I did not put any lights in. I did not put any hydroponics in, right?
Okay, well, we used to be able to, I grew up here. I'm a born and raised Calgarian, and when I was a kid, there used to be 95% of gardens in the backyard, but we've been dumbed down to think that we don't need it. That we need regulation for our food so we can get GMO and Monsanto and all the other pesticides that they give to us when we can't even control our own food supply. What would stop us from not growing it out in the backyard? There was legislation brought several years ago pertaining to the fact that they wanted to get rid of herbs, regular herbs, basil and whatnot, outside of your window. Right. I signed that petition. Why do they always think that the inspections are the best way to go through life?
Well, I'm the civil libertarian at the table, and I want to say that I have a lot of agreement with what you just said. And Lindsay, take issue with something you said. It's not up to the bureaucrats to determine what kind of a regime we have in place. It's the citizens. We are the ones who are deciding what regulations we have. And I don't see anything wrong with having a couple of plants in your backyard. I mean, if I'm living on Salt Spring Island in my dream cabin, in 10 years' time, I mean, on Salt Spring Island, you could grow the herb all year long. And I mean, I don't want the government to be telling me that, you can't have 15 plants in your backyard. I think your allusion to, or reference rather, to safety concerns would apply more to some kind of a mini grow up that a person might have in their home.
Microbes,
And I think that's wrong from a health and safety perspective. But to have a couple plants in their backyard.
1 second.
What's the difference between
Just 1 second. We have some other questions here too. So
I like the beer and wine model. I'd like the beer and wine model there too.
Okay,
I think Dave's hand's been up the longest.
Okay, Dave and then Russ.
Okay, I've had an issue on the medical aspect. You're saying protect the kids from it.
Mm-hmm.
Now there are 10 infants or more now that have been, their lives have been saved through the use of cannabis because they've had life-threatening convulsions. Now the platform you're setting up still prevents cannabis being used to treat children for medical conditions.
Not necessarily.
But the way it is set right now, and the way the policy is positioned at this point in time, you're preventing that. And that needs to be changed.
So one of the things I did express at the beginning of this is that this policy is generally for recreational use, and that medical marijuana is still separate from this.
It's not, though. That's the problem.
Because there needs to be things like this. That's why.
Well,
the general rule of no, at 16 you can't go out and buy a pack of joints.
Well, we don't regulate growing tomatoes or orchids in our home or in our backyard. Why are we going to start regulating cannabis? And if you remove,
because tomatoes and orchids don't make you feel the way cannabis makes you feel.
How do you regulate treating your children with the herb you've grown if it's the best thing for their medical condition?
I wish Raj was here. I talked to Dr. Sherman at the Pride Parade, and he wanted to be here, but he couldn't actually talk about that. And from an Alberta policy, he is in favor of cannabis. We're actually the Alberta Liberal Party, which is separate from the federal Liberals. They are working on their own policy, and you know, these are exactly the issues that we need to bring up to the Dr. Swan, to the Dr. Sherman, so that way that can be a part of that component. I just want to continue on with a few more questions. Russ?
Jerome? Me?
Yes, sorry, Jerome.
Jerome? So, I think we're getting bogged down with the whole, it's my right. It would be my right to grow in my home. Like, everything that you want to grow or sell, there's laws surrounding that. Like, and you have to, like, you can't open like an industrial, like, operation in residential zone. That has to be. It needs to be zoned in a certain way. But it's not. You can't just start selling cigarettes and out of your backyard. And depending on how much you start making, you'll be taxed accordingly. So if you're not selling, like if you're not a big organization, you're not going to get taxed because you don't fall under the GST code to be a small business. So once you do fall under that situation, then you'll follow the according small businesses and zoning restrictions that apply to that. So I think the discussion is not your right to do this being encroached upon. It's the way we do business in Canada, then you're going to have to follow the way we do business in Canada. It's just pulling that into as another form of business to be followed by proper legislation and zoning, the way we would license a small business.
Can I just get Art? Art had his hand up, and then we'll go back over there. Yeah.
Just a couple points. The medical inn, about 12 years ago, I worked in an office downtown. There was 40 people. And one of the fellows was pretty sick, and he smoked marijuana every month for 4 months before he died. Not one person in that whole floor complained, because they knew he was in pain, and they were sympathetic. So, and there's another fellow in Washington State that smokes marijuana and grows it, and I have no problem at all with that. The second point is, and maybe we should look at Washington State and other places to make their laws applicable. The second point is, I worked for a large oil field service company, and they had drug testing. And when you've got 5,000 horsepower there, I don't care if you smoked marijuana 4 days ago, your mind isn't there. Yeah. And if you were caught, everyone is drug tested in the whole company, and it made a difference. People left, and you felt a lot safer, because I've seen alcoholics on oil fields saying kill themselves. Yeah. So I think drug testing for big corporations should be thought about, maybe even for politicians. To see if they're violent. But seriously, drug testing is important. Pardon?
I'd just like to make a comment on that last point of yours. If you watch your TV commercials today about different drugs, well, not every one of them, but a lot of them that affect your body or your mind or your ability to drive, impair you, they say know how it affects you before you drive or operate machinery. It's the same thing as myself as a cannabis consumer for 41 years. I know how it affects me. I know how much I can consume before I am impaired. And as a responsible adult, that's what we need to stick with, is being a responsible adult. Trying to tell us how many plants we can grow, how we can do it in our own homes is like telling us about growing tomatoes.
Well, that's a good point on drug testing, because alcohol gets out of your system in 12 hours. Marijuana takes a couple days.
Well, the actual effects wear off within 3 to 4 hours, if not less. The actual effects, hours. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I can show you many studies, and absolutely, sir.
There are also no proven detrimental effects. Now, that is not to say that I'm taking one position or another, but there are no proven detrimental effects upon driving based on cannabis use.
All right, you patiently had your hand up. I'm just going to have Ryan respond to that.
Yeah, there was something Tyrell had alluded to, and I've been hearing it's kind of themed from a few other people about, the medicinal benefits of medical marijuana, and we know there are people who use it for medicinal purposes. So I'd like to just throw this question out there after first having Keith address it. And the question that I have in my mind is, to what extent, if any, do you think that the reluctance of the medical community to sign off on medical certificates is because of their intimate linkage to big pharma? I mean, there are many people, there are a million people, an estimated 1 million people in this country who use marijuana for medicinal purposes, and this is aside from, the recreational users, and they're using it for a reason, because prescription drugs have not been working as effectively. So there's big money in big pharma. Do you see some kind of collusion here?
Well, with the pharmacies, of course, the pharma companies don't want it out there. Like I said, it was removed. It was in the pharmacopoeia until the 1940s, the U.S. pharmacopoeia. We know it does work. These people are damaging their organs. They're damaging. A lot of them are dying from the drugs themselves and not the disease that they're suffering from. And a lot of them have stopped many pills, 20, 30, dozen pills a day that are damaging them and turning them into zombies where they can't get off the couch and do things and have a productive life. I know many, many medical cannabis consumers, without it, they're finished. Their lives will be over. They're not going to contribute to society positively. They're going to be more of a drain on our healthcare system. It's just, the evidence is there, and to say it's not there and it's a gateway drug and all this other reefer madness nonsense is being irresponsible adults. The effects of cannabis wear off in 1 to 4 hours, end of story. Anything else is nonsense. The facts are that, period. You can believe otherwise. Just one quick one, Michelle. On that, it does leave the effects, the psychoactive effects leave within 1 to 4 hours. It can stay in your fat cells in your body for up to 30 days, but it does not impair you or give you psychoactive effects. When I smoke a joint, it's like you taking a low-dose aspirin.
Debbie. I would just like to state my opinion about growing in your own home. If a person grows in their own home and they're using it, it's also therapeutic. The lights for PDS patients.
Yeah.
And also, if I'm going to grow in my own home, I want it safe. I don't want to burn my kids to the ground. This is my medicine. I want it clean. I'll know where it comes from. I know somebody out there who's not growing it, who's not growing it for me. If I know if you can grow it yourself, it is clean, period, and you're going to make sure it's done right, because you don't want to be smoking anything laced with anything. Also, if it's done in a person's own home, it's a medication. They're going to take it responsibly. As for the fact you were saying about the 40% alcohol proof, well, cannabis, sure, they say it's a lot stronger now than back then. You're going to do less. People are going to be responsible. They're going to make sure their cannabis is secured right. I don't want to go buy it off some drug dealer on 4th Store. If I can't afford it, go to the government. They're not going to pay for my
Nice. There's a response going for you.
Okay, you asked what about what's going on with the medical profession. I go to a clinic that uses student doctors. They take a course on cannabis. During that course, they are quoted verbatim from the War on Drugs Handbook from the 1970s.
Scandalous.
It is.
And they quoted that directly to me this year.
Dave
when I
was just
going for
talking about
license.
medical doctors and how they actually quote legislation from like the 70s as opposed to helping him now.
U.S. government legislation on top of it.
Yeah, U.S. tainted government studies. So I think you had a point?
Yeah, I feel very persuaded by this lady who wants to grow her own marijuana, and I totally agree. But I also think it's easier to sell legalization across the board through the House of Commons, the Senate, and through the public with regulation. Why? Because so many people are still so cautious about it. And the prohibition's been going on so long and caused so many problems, so many infringements upon human rights, that I just want it over with. And that's why I favor this policy as it is now.
And I mean, one thing I will say is that our worry is not anyone in this room. It's the 21-year-old guys who are growing it in their basement, right? Those are the worries. Like,
they're doing it anyway.
I understand that, and I understand that, but you know, our worry isn't someone who's going to take the right steps and make sure they're not burning down their house. It's the people who aren't going to do those kinds of things. And our issue generally isn't necessarily the medical community, because you guys take so much care. It's the people who don't take care, and you know, a lot of the recreational users. So.
Well, should we stop kids from having cell phones?
I'm going to have a new speaker. She hasn't spoken yet.
Injured,
She's
like
going to make a
6%
statement. She's actually running for school trustee, if you'd like to.
I'm actually running for
Ward 10, I'm sorry.
My name is Nergis Lewis, and I actually work with youth, and my concern comes from the mental health aspect. I've been working for the youth here for over 35 years in this course, and I work with the youth, high school and junior students, and my concern is for the mental health students. I have right now 450 students on a case, and I know, but that's how life is, right?
Yeah, well,
exactly.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay, the 15-year-olds who are prescribing themselves for medicinal purposes. Now, for me to legalize this would actually monitor for their safety. For one thing, that they don't become pawns and mules to support their own habits.
I can't agree with you more.
And we can also eliminate teenage pregnancy because of that, because the pimps use them not only for drugs but also for other reasons.
Well, as soon as, yeah, you're right.
And so for me, legalizing is very important so that it's regulated, it's clean,
yes,
and it's monitored.
Good points, yes.
Okay, Cal?
Yeah, just as a disclosure, I'm a retired police officer.
Right.
Well,
comment, sir.
I've smoked dope before too, so that's okay. So I kind
of you can never run.
And I was a liberal politician in the last federal election, so I've kind of got all bases covered here. My question, I guess, I have a question to the group, but as well as an observation. And my question is buying or selling marijuana a gateway crime to the criminal justice system? And my own observation, because I've worked in this precinct as part of my career, is that I've noticed that, you know, a lot of people, when they their first crimes or contact with the criminal justice or other criminals has been through being arrested for drug possession, and that's where they said, okay, well, now I've done this mistake, and guess what? Now I'm pawning my stuff. I mean, a lot of the places that I busted that were selling stolen goods to people, they were also exchanging marijuana back and forth. So there seemed to be a link a lot during my career with the criminal justice system, entering the criminal justice system, and the drug culture.
But also, go ahead, Brian.
I was going to say, how do we define crime, though? Because quite frankly, there was a time in this country, within the lifetime of some people in the room, where if you were to experiment sexually with somebody of the same sex, that would be a gateway crime into the criminal justice system. So, you know, I take your point, but we as citizens, as responsible adults living in a democracy, have the right to define the laws that we want to live by and to decide what should be acceptable and what should not be acceptable. So your point's well taken, but I don't agree, because I mean, how do you define crime?
I think Cam's point more specifically isn't necessarily about you know whether or not this should be a crime. It's that as a contact with the justice system, you get branded a criminal, and that branding, it lowers your quality of life.
Yes.
Because it lowers, you have to disclose that you have been convicted of a crime.
Okay.
It means that you can lose job opportunities.
True.
It puts you in a lower socioeconomic grouping because of that. And if you do end up going to jail, you're putting people who have committed crimes in a positive sense of the word. It is a crime. It's illegal in this country, whether or not it should be. And you're putting them in close contact with people who have committed quote-unquote real crimes.
Okay.
And you're exposing them to the drug cartels. You're exposing these kids, 16-year-old kids, to the Hells Angels. You're exposing them to people who are going to drive them into a life of more than just this.
So if that was your point, then okay, point well taken, and that would support my firm conviction that we need to legalize the substance.
Yeah. Okay, so in the back, you've been waiting patiently. He's number 2. Okay.
Just want to bring it back to...
Louder?
I just want to bring it back to you quickly if I can. Brewing in your own house, and the gentleman said, like, with alcohol proof, 40 proof, 60 proof, you can't distill your own alcohol. The reason being is because it's dangerous to distill your own alcohol. If you do it wrong, you blow yourself up. If you do it wrong, you can kill people. You can't convince me that, like, in any of the legal markets that we look around the world, be it medical or like flat out legalization, there's always been regulations for growing at home. I feel like Colorado and Washington, I can't remember exactly, but I believe it's 6 plants to a house. You can't tell me that someone growing 6 plants is going to damage a house beyond repair. It's just, growing cannabis is very, very similar to growing any other plant, right? But on the point of regulation, right? And the strength and all that, right? The strength of pot isn't going to be a big issue ultimately when it's legalized. What I think is going to be a big issue is the strength of hashish and the strength of cannabis oils. And both of those products shouldn't be created in your own home. I suppose certain hashish is technically safe, but still, you see, like, to me, if you legalize a substance and then say that you can't grow it in your own house, it's kind of shooting yourself in the foot, right? Like, we're saying it's legal, you can smoke it, but if you grow it, we're still gonna...
But Lindsay, you were saying a license. You wasn't saying
I
not
wasn't
grow
saying
it.
no. I was in no way was I
No.
saying no.
Exactly.
Right? And
But you be licensed. I understand where you're coming from. Totally, I do.
More of a permit than a license.
Well, yeah, but
to make sure you got the right connections.
Yeah.
But once it's legal, like tomatoes and orchids, those guys, generally responsible adults, are gonna.
But I mean, like, maybe your permit or your license or whatever you want to call it, it says, I'm growing it outside. Okay, great. We don't need to worry about electricity and plumbing.
Yeah.
Or I'm growing it inside and I've done these steps.
I've got
Right.
another point for you. But
Okay, you'll be 4. You haven't had a chance to speak.
I just wanted to respond to what he was saying. I brought up the idea of the spirits being illegal in home, just to show that there are limits to and laws put in place to protect people, and that was to mention that. I also mentioned that there has to be a firm, proper, evidence-based inquiry and into what we can do and what we can't do. Just like you were saying, growing is not the same as creating hashish and oils that can be a lot more potent. So there's things that are, because of, like you said, you're altering your mind, and you can go into can start debates on mushrooms. You can start debates on other things that are natural, but are a lot more.
But the whole
it was on a preface that this was an illegal thing. So if you're taking that preface away, the whole discussion and change. So that's always the whole.
And of course, the hope is always that whatever does happen when we legalize, that it's an evolving thing. We're not going to get it right the first time. I can guarantee it. But, you know, it's going to be a work in progress for any number of years until we figure out what really works for this country. Because yes, we can look at Colorado, and yes, we can look at Washington State. But whether or not those exact models work for us is going to depend on how our country reacts to whatever we do.
I agree, Lindsay. It's going to take time to come out with a policy, but you know, the beer and wine model, it's been working well. You know, at least we could save a lot of energy and time and effort to do something. Get the beer and wine model in place. It will save us a lot of the effort, and then we can start tweaking it from there. I'm all for, you know, people getting tradespeople in. I recommend that in medical gardens. I recommend that in recreational gardens. I recommend that if you're going to grow tomatoes in your shed, your basement, your garage.
If you're growing anything
I don't care, exactly. Anything. You know, get the tradespeople. Go to the grow shop, say, look, I need a tradesperson. If you're a Health Canada exempted, let them know that, and away you go. Be safe.
I just wanted to touch on the comment about it being a gateway crime. It was actually, I've always been in favor of legalization, but it was actually a good friend of mine who's a police officer in Saskatoon who I think gave me the best argument for legalization, and that's exactly what he said, is he arrests so many kids who come from, you know, they are good kids, they go to school, they work really hard, they're positive role models in their communities, and they're getting thrown in jail with legitimate criminals and are exposed to that because of the marijuana prohibition that's in place. And that was what he said the greatest argument for legalization was, is that it takes away that initial arrest, right? So it removes the exposure to the criminal justice system. I thought it was a great argument.
It also keeps the kids away from the drug dealers that are going to get them on stuff that is going to hook them.
More importantly,
exactly.
He said, you know, he has no problem with people. He said he would rather a kid or anyone, any marijuana user, buy pot from like their friend down the street that they know, because then you're not putting money into that whole drug trade, right? Which is really what the problem is. The problem isn't smoking pot. The problem is that you're funding somebody else's meth habit or whatever, right? And pot is just the bottom.
It is one more argument in the quiver of arrows in favor of legalization. But I'd like to back up a little bit and speak from the perspective of, you know, the current prohibition. It's a gateway crime, but it's a gateway crime that is disproportionately involves black people, native youth, and not white youth. It's a fact that we live in a world where, unfortunately, there's still racism out there. I mean, we may not have, you know, people riding around in cars with sheets on, but the racism is still there. It's not as overt, but it's still there. And native people, black people, people of color are disproportionately represented in our criminal justice system. I mean, there are all kinds of white frat boys who are going to spark up tonight on the UC campus, and they are not going to be appearing before judges because these are the sons of doctors and lawyers and police officers. And, you know, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, we'll talk to them on the sly, and no charges will be laid. But tell that to somebody from Hobbema, an 15-year-old from Hobbema, and it's not going to happen.
Pertaining to the gentleman's comment quite a bit earlier, so it's kind of a delay because of a comment made about 3 minutes ago. Pertaining to the government being responsible to legislate, fund, and be able to produce actual proper policies. And back in April, late April, they can account for $3.1 billion in a massive advertising campaign. They went about to dumb it down so it only made it into the news once, and then keep advertising all this other stuff. Is this how they're going to handle marijuana legislation as well?
Sort of how they are.
Well, preferably
it's a liberal prohibition. It's a first step.
You said about the safety, pertaining to the safety, anti-terrorism. So there's terrorism and there's $3.1 billion. Who's the terrorists?
Debbie, you guys are doing in the northeast riding. Are the Liberals also doing these sessions out to Calgary, out to the different provinces to get the word out there for the education?
So right now, Liberals are developing policy, and my hope is that everyone in this room will have spoken in a way that our board, who are here, who are present, have heard what you're saying, so we can develop and submit a policy with Lindsay, knowing how to tweak this, so that when it does get submitted, that this is something that will better represent Calgary East. So that said, ableism is an issue, especially in the 420 community, which is why I have that survey online. So if people, you hear something that you don't like, or that you really like, or that you want to emphasize, please fill out that survey that's on the events page, so that when we submit our policy, we know we're getting your voice heard.
But we're a rarity.
So I have a question.
We are a rarity.
Don't do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
As future, hopefully, policymakers and stuff like that, the young Liberals, what would you do? Say, I live on a pension. Now, I'm epileptic. I haven't been able to work for a long period of my life. I finally got a job at a shop that is respectful, and I teach as much as I can with it. But what are you going to do for the disabled people that are living on pensions, and these massive conglomerates are going to come in and just try to sell us weed starting in May? And I've heard horror stories of $8 to $10 a gram. I can tell you my grower gives it to me for free. So how am I supposed to compete?
Yeah, I heard $8.80 a gram.
Yeah.
So
it's currently $5 for the government.
Yeah. And I still think
I have a
another farm here.
Yeah. I mean, and really, yeah, and that's really why I still think that the medical aspect needs to be separate, because if you're running it through a pharmacy and you're running it through a prescription and your drug plans, then that should be picking it up.
Well, and this is the thing. My prescription is covered by Alberta law. All my prescriptions are covered. But when I've broached it 3 times with Alberta Health Services,
they won't do it.
They won't even look at it, because we cannot be looked at as a drug dealer. 7 years ago, my doctor was allowed to prescribe this to me. I hear the horror story every day coming into the store that people are going to be spending up to $3 grand on a license. Why? My doctor didn't even charge me for the paperwork.
And that's something that it needs to be changed. I mean, Dave was showing me his rejection letters earlier.
400. I've seen receipts for $2,600.
So one of the things that generally is regulated by the provinces is how much a doctor can charge for specific things, and that is done in consultation generally with the federal government as well as all the different provincial governments.
I would say my doctors were compassion, whereas a lot of these other ones spoke compassion.
So, I mean, that is something that needs to be addressed by the provincial health authorities as well as the federal government. And the federal government we have currently is not in favor of compassion.
I'm telling you, I'm scared.
Totally agree.
I am too, and that's why 2015 is going to be so important. And unfortunately, and I wish I could do something before then.
Well, like Dana Larson has sensible BC. How come we cannot have sensible wake the hell up Canada?
No. And you know,
Alberta, I want a dispensary here. I want a vapor lounge for me to sit in with my medical friends. I can't open that because I'll be charged worse than Carla Homolka.
And I feel for you, I do. And I wish there was something I could personally do, or that our party could do in the interim. But unfortunately, the only thing we can do is make sure we're ready for 2015.
And Raj Sherman,
I'm going to take this information and go to the store.
Of course.
I will spread it.
And I have posters actually. If you want posters.
Yeah. So this is about information sharing. Like, and Raj Sherman, if he was here, his new quote is that right now the government is hard on soft crime and soft on hard crime.
It is.
That's his quote. Yes. So he like provincially we have the Alberta Liberals on side, and federally we have the Liberals believing that too.
When you get true life people, like when I choose the medicine, I'm telling you the benefit is huge, and I don't get baked off it.
Right.
So the other part that I'm kind of worried about is like these conglomerates are going to come in, they're going to set us up and hopefully fix us up. But are they fixing us up really and truly?
And that is an increasing worry over the last number
my
of
point,
years,
too.
and it's
touches on
it's coming to the point where, you know, we can't do anything to stop them. Not right now.
Me with epilepsy, I
Yeah.
get my 6 ounces, but I had a customer in the store the other day, he was prescribed a pound a month, and he picked up a box that I couldn't pick up, easily 70 pounds, picked it up, walked it to the back of the store for me so it could be done. But he gets a pound a month, what the, you know,
and
I don't understand how that.
Okay, I think Brian has a point he'd like to bring in.
I first of all, you know, completely empathetic and compassionate towards your situation. When I heard that the medically approved marijuana is going to sell for $9.90 a gram, I did some quick math, and that's anywhere from $60 to $80 more expensive than what you can get now on the alternative market. And so the question which I would like to put to Keith, I think Keith, you must know or should know. Have there been some credible studies done as to what legalization would do for the price of the herb? I mean, would the price of it come down?
Well, as it's stated right now with the medical marijuana access regulations changing to the medical marijuana purposes regulations, like you said, it's going to be, you know, $8.80 is one estimate. I've heard estimates as high as $10, $12, $15. If you look at compassion clubs that are doing it now, you're looking at anywhere from $7 to $15 a gram.
Compassion clubs.
Pardon me?
I was just in Vancouver and then places were ripped off.
Well, you know, they do bring a lot to the table, though. They bring a lot of research. They do. They are under the gun. They could be arrested at any time. You know, they are sacrificing, but it is expensive. It's too expensive for people like yourself, man. In Calgary East, like Michelle said, we've got a lot of poverty here, and I know a lot of people in this area that can't afford that medication. If they can't grow it, or if they can't get a grower to grow it for them that's quality, a good grower, you know, there's a lot of horror stories where people never get their medication. They pay thousands of dollars for a grower, for a doctor, and they get nothing.
That's the thing, is you order from these clubs, which is legal through Health Canada. I was allowed to do the BCCS, and I ordered from them faithfully for a year, but $272 for an ounce, not including my $20 mail-in envelope and my hurry up on getting it to them.
Just to get back to Brian's question here with was if it's not if we're legalizing it and it is produced, you know, in a commercial regulated market for medical and the research like the Canadian Consortium is doing with the research, and we do have that, the price will come down, right? These commercial guys right now, Fred, we don't know. You know, I know some of them that have applied, and some of them are good people, but you got to understand, they're business people. This is a business, and as somebody mentioned earlier, that's how our society does operate, and we have to understand they need to make a profit or we get nothing. You know, they're not going to do it out of the goodness of their hearts. Some people do. You know, I know you do a lot of good things for good people, other people out of the goodness of your heart. Many of us do, but when it comes to business, earning a living for our family, we have to understand that too. But
I met the lady that had been granted the license from Canada to commercial grow for Alberta, and she's not talking cheap.
well, no, I know.
So,
true, it's true. Yeah.
There's two kinds of things operating right now, and I'll talk about the medical market, and then I'll talk about the black market. In the medical market, what you have, and the new regulations are forcing it to make it worse. You have demand up here, and you have supply down here.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's how you get such high prices. And so when that demand is so high, but you can't raise the supply, or you have something, it's basically an oligopoly, right? You have several people, like four, I think, it'll be four groups who are going to be able to set the price because they're the only four groups producing. Legally. The other thing you have is the black market, and the cost of how much is the cost of an ounce on the black market? I don't know.
Right now, I can get
$220. That's pretty
average.
Yeah,
okay,
I'm getting a half ounce for $100.
Okay, I'm gonna say $200. All right,
So
we're just gonna go with an ounce for $200 because I just got three numbers. What you have is you have the cost of producing, and then you have what's called the black market tax, and that is the opportunity risk of getting caught.
But why is it cheaper from me on the black market than it is from the medicinal compassion club?
A lot cheaper to
like I
produce in the
said,
black market.
Because what you have is you have a larger supply in the black market than you do legally. But in the black market, you still have what's called the black market tax, like I said. And that is the portion that can change, because the cost of production is the cost of production, but you can raise however much worth you put on the risk of getting caught dealing or growing. And so that's the part that will change if you legalize. That amount will go down because there's no longer an opportunity risk. There's the opportunity to sell. And the free market works in a fabulous way this way, right? As long as someone's willing to undercut the next guy, it's gonna get cheaper.
Okay, so another point over here.
I just wanted to back things up for one moment. Some of us here are Calgary 420 members. Am I a Calgary 420 member? I don't know.
As far as we're concerned, you are, sir.
I'm a Liberal supporter. Anyhow, there are Liberal Party members here who may not have a great interest in this debate, and there are certainly people here who have a very vested interest in this debate. In 2 years, we're going to have a federal election. We know where Harper and the Tories stand on this issue, and I apologize for the colors I'm wearing here tonight. Purely a slip up on my part. And we have the Liberal policy in making here right now, which is going towards legalization. We also have the NDP stand on this, which is decriminalization. And if we, to a lot of people, if they look at this debate, they're going to look at the current, what we have currently under Harper and the Tories, and the other extreme of legalization under the Liberals, and I believe the Green Party as well.
Mm-hmm.
If we decide to compromise the general population, say, well, maybe legalization is not the right idea, but decriminalization I can live with. We still have the problem of criminal organizations making massive profits in crime in the streets, because the person who's consuming doesn't have any worries, but there still has to be somebody who produces that product. And we also have, I'd like to point out, bloated police budgets. I would really like to see what the City of Calgary police budget is for drug enforcement. I would really like to see what the RCMP budget is for drug enforcement. I do a lot of reading online, and I saw something, I can't vouch for the credibility of it, but it said the DEA budget each year in the States is $2.4 billion. Take a tenth of that in Canada, $240 million by federal law enforcement, and then also your municipal budgets. So I'd like to point that out. Also, that we should have, excuse me, it's a little personal here, studies done in universities, medical studies of marijuana. My dad passed away 8 years ago, and God damn it, you know, it's tough that he didn't have access to that at that time. And there's evidence out there. There are studies being done in Israel. There are studies being done now in the States showing that you know, that the cannabinoids in marijuana is effective against, thank you, sir, against killing cancer. And it really pisses me off when I think what my dad went through.
Yeah.
Last point. On that there, Peter, I'd like to say you'd like to see the budget. So would I, because if they're spending all this money busting cannabis users, even for that matter, people that do crack, whatever, why is this money not taken in for when they need help, healthcare system? Yeah. Like, I've known addicts in this city alone that said, I want help. I'm sorry, you're going to have to come back next week. Yeah. Well, what the hell was that? You know, we need more money in healthcare so that they can get the treatment when needed. That's going to solve a lot of the crime right there. Yeah. You know,
well, they still want to give up their budgets, that's for sure. And I'd like to see those figures.
1 second, we have a new voice. Let's hear a new voice.
I have a question. I think Mr. Messina may be able to answer it. Coming from a taxpayer perspective, how much taxpayer money is going into the court system to prosecute and challenge all these people who are, you know, taking this all the way to the Supreme Court? Because I'll disclose, I'm not a user, I never have been. But as a taxpayer, if I'm finding out that hundreds of millions of dollars, which we need for infrastructure, which we need for a healthcare system, is being wasted in a court system, I want to know about it. I was wondering if the Liberal Party would be willing to start posting those numbers online, even for the last decade.
Special Senate Committee in 2002 estimated 1 to 1.5 billion a year in Canada alone, and this is 11 years later, over 11 years later. So we know it's more than that. And that's, you know,
Because now we're in terrorism world. Now
There
we're
you
post
go.
9/11,
Good
so we
point.
know that
Very
we've
good
increased dramatically our police state funding because we have to fight terrorists.
Absolutely.
Okay, Susan.
I was just going to say, Plains Magazine had a fairly comprehensive article in June, and they did quote some figures.
Okay, yeah. I
And
remember that,
for the next federal election, I'd like to see the Liberals hammer that point home.
Of course.
Because
And
I think as a taxpayer, we have so many other, important
Social
issues,
priorities.
problems that we need to address to help solve some social problems. And I think I could just see this going to the hands of lawyers. And nothing against lawyers.
No offense, I work in
Right,
And,
it's a really good
just one more thing. For all instead of the Canadian tax, if people want to fight and to endorse prohibition, let them pay for it, not the Canadian taxpayer.
It's not
All right, so I want to thank everybody for coming. We have 15 minutes left, and I would like there to be some time that, cameras off. Our panelists are here for questions that you just don't feel comfortable asking in front of other people or whichever. So, I'd like to give that time. I'd like to thank each and every one of our panelists for coming. So I have no authority to white hat anybody, but I do have Bernard Calibo cowboy hats for each one of our guests.
I can tell you, we've white hatted some people at the airport a few times, and our old
So
mayor
I
was
just wanted to thank everyone for coming. We're going to post, we were looking for stats, things like that. Let's post that on the events page so that everybody who has liked it can see that and have access to it any time. And again, there's a survey online. Don't hesitate to send it in to us so that we can read it and add to what we have to say.